You know, we're often told this story that Islam just sort of appeared, out of nowhere, in a quiet, isolated desert. Well, that's a myth. To really get its origins, you have to place it right in the eye of a massive geopolitical hurricane. So forget the empty desert. Instead, I want you to imagine a world on the absolute brink of total collapse.
So, in the early 7th century, the two global superpowers, the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire, launched what was basically the World War III of antiquity. I mean, this was the most brutal, devastating conflict the world had ever seen. For almost 30 years, they just ravaged the known world. Jerusalem was sacked, plagues were everywhere. People genuinely believed they were living through the end times. This apocalyptic dread wasn't some abstract idea, it was the very air people breathed.
And that brings us to the central question we're digging into here. How does a world that is literally on fire, a world convinced it's witnessing its own end, give birth to a brand new global religion? Because, as we're about to see, the Qur'an wasn't just born in this apocalyptic world. It was speaking directly to it and about it.
Okay, so where's the evidence for this? Well, the first piece is pretty stunning, actually. The Quran doesn't just kind of allude to this epic war, it comments on it in real time, almost like a divine news bulletin. Now, to get why this was so mind-blowing, you have to understand the context. At the time this was revealed, the Romans were getting absolutely crushed. I mean, it was over. The Persians had taken everything, Egypt, Syria, they'd even sacked the holy city of Jerusalem. A Roman comeback seemed impossible. And yet, right then, the Quran makes this incredibly bold, very specific geopolitical prediction. This is the smoking gun. It proves this new faith was not isolated, it was plugged directly into the world stage.
But the war between the big empires, that's only part of the story. We also need to completely ditch this idea that pre-Islamic Arabs were just disconnected nomads wandering the desert. That's just not true. For centuries, you had these powerful, sophisticated Arab kingdoms right on the frontiers of these empires.
So let me introduce you to the Ghassanids and the Lakhmids. These guys were a big deal. They were powerful Christian Arab kingdoms, and they basically served as client states, or you could call them proxies, for the great empires. You had the Ghassanids, allied with Rome, guarding the western border, and the Lakhmids, allied with Persia, on the eastern border. They weren't just nomads, they were building palaces, funding poets, and were serious political players long before Islam showed up.
And then, in what has to be one of the most catastrophic miscalculations in history, right before launching their world-ending war, both empires made the exact same fatal mistake. They dismantled these buffer kingdoms. They just cut off their most important, most loyal Arab allies.
So what happens when you do that? You get this: a massive power vacuum right on their doorstep. All of a sudden, you have thousands of restless, highly trained, very well-armed Arab warriors who now feel totally betrayed, and they have no leader. They were basically a political tinderbox, just waiting for a spark.
And as if all that political chaos wasn't enough, it was being mirrored by a spiritual crisis. Because at this exact moment, Christianity wasn't this single, unified faith. No, it was in the middle of a brutal, theological civil war with itself.
The central question that was tearing Christianity apart was who or what exactly is Jesus? Is he divine? Is he human? Is he both? And look, this wasn't some friendly academic discussion. Getting the answer wrong could mean exile, persecution, or worse. The official Roman Church, the Chalcedonians, cracked down hard on groups like the Monothists and Nestorians, branding them heretics. So where did all these exiled refugee Christian communities flee to find safety? You guessed it, they fled to Arabia.
And this is where it gets really interesting. This shows you exactly how the Quran is interacting with its environment. You see, it often talks about stories of Jesus, like him speaking as a baby in the cradle, that aren't in the official Bible. But you know where they were popular? In the apocryphal Gospels that these refugee Christian communities loved. So the Quran isn't just copying some other book, it's jumping right into a live, heated conversation that was already happening right there in Arabia.
So, into this incredibly bitter, complex, centuries-long debate, the Quran offers this clear, simple, and powerful resolution. It just cuts right through all the arguments about the Trinity with this one statement. Don't say three. God is only one God. In a world tearing itself apart over theological details, this was a message of radical, unifying simplicity.
All right, so let's pull all these threads together. What we've got is a political crisis, a religious crisis, and a terrifying world war, all happening at the same time. The early message of Islam wasn't born in a vacuum. It shows up as a direct solution to this perfect storm of chaos. I mean, just look at the checklist of disasters facing the world at that moment. The great empires, they're shattered. The powerful Arab tribes, armed to the teeth but leaderless. The world's dominant religion, at war with itself. And the mood of pretty much everyone, utterly terrified that the end of the world was here.
When you read the earliest chapters of the Qur'an, the language is incredibly intense. It's terrifying. It's apocalyptic. But you have to realize, this wasn't just a metaphor. For the people hearing this for the first time, this language perfectly captured their lived experience. The Qur'an's warning of impending doom wasn't some abstract threat. It was basically the 6 o'clock news.
And this is why a lot of modern historians, like Fred Donner, argue that this early community wasn't trying to build an empire. Not yet. Instead, it was this urgent, what he calls a believers movement. And that's key. It likely included righteous Jews and Christians right alongside the followers of the new message. They were all in it together, preparing for the end of the world. The message hit so hard because it was an apocalyptic movement for a world that genuinely felt like it was ending.
Okay, but how did this message spread so incredibly fast? It wasn't just the content, it was the medium. It was the delivery system. The message arrived in a form that essentially hacked the oral internet of 7th century Arabia. So back then in Arabia, there were basically two major forms of powerful, high-status speech. First, you had shir, which was high poetry. Think of it as their history books, their news media, and their high art, all rolled into one. Then you had saj, which was the rhyming, often mysterious prose used by soothsayers and mystics. These were the established channels of the culture.
Then along comes the Qur'an, which literally means the recitation, and it's something totally new. It had the powerful rhythm and the sound of soothsayer prose, of saj, but instead of being obscure, it delivered this crystal-clear, world-changing prophetic message. It didn't fit into any of their existing categories, and this linguistic shock forced people to stop and really listen. It completely hacked the Arab ear. So when you put it all together, you can see how the core message offered a direct answer to each and every crisis. The call for one God, that was the solution to the religious civil war. The call for one community, the Ummah, that was the solution to the tribal power vacuum. And the urgent message of a final warning, that was the solution for a world paralyzed by apocalyptic dread. The world Islam entered wasn't some quiet, empty backwater. Not at all. It was the wreckage of an old world order. It was a world of shattered empires, of broken churches, and deep, profound, existential fear. It was a world that was desperately waiting for an answer.
But that leads to one last fascinating question. If the stage was so perfectly set for this kind of message, was anyone already out there looking for it? Islamic tradition talks about this mysterious group called the Hanifs, people who were supposedly native monotheists, searching for the one true God before Muhammad's mission even began. So, were they real? And if they were, who were they? Well, that's the mystery we're going to tackle next time.